there's a difference between a good game and a bad game. And there's also a difference between a game and no game. And we don't know what the difference is exactly. But there is a difference. And then we might even say, well, not only are there good games and bad games, but some good games are better than other games. How many of you have played Settlers of Catan? Okay. Is that better than Monopoly or worse?
Better.
It's better. Does anybody think it's not better? Okay, why is it better? What's better about it?
It's more complex, and part of what you said where you can steal. I mean, it's not necessarily stealing, but there's a piece in the game, I forget what it's called, I think it's like a robber or something like that. And
Yeah, there's a robber, yeah.
And you place him on one of the tiles, and again...
You can mess with people.
Yeah, essentially.
So that's fun. It is fun. It is. It's like, I'm going to get you with this robber.
It's more akin to like real life, I think. Like in Monopoly. So,
Aha.
I mean...
No, that's reasonable. That's reasonable. That's reasonable. It's also got a strategic element. How many of you played Risk? Okay. Settlers of Catan or Risk? Settlers?
Risk.
Who says Risk?
I do.
Okay, two Risk diehards. What about the rest of you? How many for Risk? 2. How many for Settlers of Catan? Okay. So, well, Settlers of Catan is quite a bit like Risk because it has a strategic element, right? And there's a territorial expansion that goes along with it. And there's also trading, which is one of the things that's nice about Monopoly and about Risk. Okay, but so you can see that you have intuitions about what constitutes a better game. And part of the way that you develop those intuitions is not exactly philosophically, because I doubt if you've really thought through why Settlers of Catan is a better game, say, than Risk or Monopoly, for those of you that think it is. But you watch your own reaction. And your own reaction is something like, well, I'd rather play Settlers of Catan. And you might ask yourself, why? But you don't have to. You can just rather play it. And then, you think, well, what does it mean that you'd rather play it? And you say, well, it's more fun, it's more enjoyable. If asked voluntarily, that's the one I would pick. But you don't really know why, apart from those reasons. But obviously, those are complex. That's a complex social engagement, those games. They're complex. And in fact, they're so complex that you can have preferences and not even know why. Now, that's interesting. And I think the idea that there are games, good games and bad games, and games and non-games is a nice way of starting to conceptualize what the difference might be between moral systems. Because a game is actually a moral system, right? It has a point, it has an end. You have to cooperate and compete to run through the game. So a while back, a psychologist actually started this, and it's reprehensible, but psychologists have done lots of reprehensible things, and this is one of them. This psychologist, whose name I don't remember at the moment, was reviewing the literature on the difference in aggression between boys and girls and men and women. And boys and men are much more aggressive, depending on how you define aggressive, than girls and women. Now, that tends actually to be mostly true with physical aggression. So you might say kicking, hitting, biting, punching, stealing. 2-year-old boys, for example, the ones who do most of that are boys. Now, the 2-year-old girls are out cutting each other up behind their backs, but no one measures that, right? And so you find, for example, with female aggression, it tends to be relationship savaging. And you see that in the playground, you see it in junior high, you see it in high school, and you see it on the net. It's always the same thing. So whether men are more aggressive than women depends on how you define aggression, but men are more physically aggressive anyways. A while back, there was this idea that maybe we could dampen down the male aggression by socializing little boys more like little girls. So, and one of the offshoots of that was the idea that we should only allow children to play cooperative games. Now, the first thing you might notice is that anything you've ever done that was a game was not cooperative. Right, like it's not a game if it's just cooperative. But then the other thing you might notice is that the distinction between a cooperative and a competitive game is far more sophisticated than people who come up with those dim-witted theories about how to improve the world would ever appreciate. So here's an example. Is hockey a game? Yes. Is it an aggressive game?
Yes.
Is it a competitive game?
Yes.
Is it a cooperative game?
Yes.
Aha! Why? Why is it a cooperative game?
You have to work together.
Right, so there's the team, right?
Yeah.
So you're obviously cooperating with your team members, but you're also maybe trying to be the best player.
Yes.
But you're also trying to be the best player in a way that doesn't irritate the hell out of your team players, right? Because that's actually, there's something about that that's counterproductive. Like even if you're a good player, if you're a prima donna and you hog the puck, say, and maybe you're not interested in the development of your other team members, like you're not a good player, even if you're the most talented. So there's definitely a cooperative element. Is there a cooperative element beyond that?
Well, yeah, you have to all agree to sort of cooperate in so much as, agreeing to the rules of the game and playing within.
Right. You don't bring a chessboard or a basketball. Right. No matter if you're on different teams. Right. Because you're all there to play hockey. So just to play hockey is a cooperative endeavor, because think of all the other things you could be doing instead of playing hockey at that time. You could be doing an infinite number of other things. So really, if you look at the relationship between cooperation and competition in any collaborative human affair, things are usually competitive at one level, cooperative at another, competitive at another. Like there's this continual interplay between competition and cooperation, and you can't disentangle them. Now, one of the things that Piaget said, which Piaget's for those of you who don't know, and you probably all do know, was perhaps the foremost developmental psychologist of the 20th century, even though he didn't think he was a psychologist. Piaget actually made the claim, the radical claim, that 2-year-olds, for example, and this isn't Piaget's claim, but it's associated. If you put groups of people together and they're age matched, so you got a group of 9-month-olds, say 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, all the way up to 18, and you just throw them in a room, maybe with some things for them to do, and then you count the number of violent acts, which is kicking, hitting, biting, or stealing. Okay? 2-year-olds, they're the most violent human beings. And most of them actually aren't violent. There's a subset of them that are violent, it's about 5 to 10% of them, and almost all of those are boys. And then if you track those boys across time, over the next 2 years, most of them become civilized. And the ones that don't never become civilized. And then, so they're kind of antisocial throughout their childhood, and then when testosterone kicks in at about 14 and all the boys get antisocial again, they catch up to the always antisocial boys, and then the normal boys taper off quite dramatically at around 19 and flatten right out by about 27, but the antisocial boys, they just keep being antisocial. So now, Piaget noted that there was a dramatic transformation in behavior, individual behavior in relationship to the social world between the ages of 2 and 4. And if you watch 2-year-olds play together, he said that what they did fundamentally was like a parallel play. So maybe there's one 2-year-old there and another 2-year-old there, and that 2-year-old is playing truck, and this 2-year-old is playing ambulance or something, or maybe playing doll, and they're sitting with each other, and maybe they interact a little bit, but they're not playing the same game. Okay, so what they're doing in some sense is they're engaged in a goal-directed activity. It has a point, and they're sort of integrating all their interior sub-personalities, in a sense, in a way that allows them to play a single game with themselves. And that's pretty complex from a cognitive perspective, right? Because it means they're not fractionated, and they're not being pulled out by hunger or anger or sadness or fear or any of those things. And they're doing something that's highly complex cognitively, and they can organize themselves well enough to do it for a substantial period of time. So it's a major developmental advance. But they can't do it with another person. Now, one of Piaget's hypotheses was that they couldn't they couldn't play the same game with another person without actually setting up a competitive structure. So that actually competition was a prerequisite to cooperation. And so the idea was, okay, so if you watch how kids do this, you can get a sense of it. I mean, on the one hand, maybe they all get together and they decide to play tag. Okay, and everyone knows the rules for tag, and you can win at tag. But without the point in some sense is the construction of a dominance hierarchy of competence, right? Someone wins, and then there's the people who are sort of second best and third best, and everybody's really into doing that. You all have to get together if you're kids, and you say, well, what should we do? And then you decide, we're going to play tag, and then you set up the rules, because there's infinite variations of tag, and then everyone goes off and plays. And so it's a competitive game, because only one person can win, or maybe one at a time can win. But once you've all agreed on that, well, then you're cooperating. So that's quite interesting, and Piaget regarded that as a necessary stage in the development of the ability to act like a social creature. And so here's something that happens if you're not a very popular kid. So let's say 4 kids are playing jacks. Good enough. I don't think kids play jacks anymore, but whatever. If they were playing jacks, they're sitting there playing jacks, and when you play jacks, you bounce a ball and you pick up a jack, and if you manage that, and the ball, if you manage that, then you drop the ball and you pick up 2 jacks and you grab the ball and you keep going up to like 8 jacks or whatever. So now another kid wants to play jacks, and we'll say this is a relatively popular kid. And so the kid sidles up to the group that's playing and sits down, because they're all sitting down, and then watches, and then maybe starts making jack playing motions or a couple of comments about how the jack game is going, and then maybe the other kids don't have to disrupt what they're doing very much, and they can kind of open the circle and let that kid scoot in, and then he gets to, or she gets to play jacks too. Whereas a kid that doesn't, and that often doesn't happen, even if it's a popular kid, sometimes the little group that's already formed won't open and let them in. You've been at cocktail parties. It's exactly the same thing, right? It's exactly the same thing. So you're supposed to hang around the edge of the conversation, and maybe if you've got something that isn't too stupid to say, you can offer it, and maybe they let you in, right? So, okay, so now if you're not very social, what you do is you stand out there, and you don't notice what the hell's going on, and you don't start to match your body to what's happening, and maybe you say, I don't want to play jacks. That's a stupid game. Let's go do something else, in which case the kids are not happy with you, and you're unpopular. And that's that. You're stuck with it. Because if you've got that by the time you're 4, about the other kids are going to leave you so far in the dust, you're never going to catch up. Okay, so what have we concluded from that? We might conclude that people play games. There's lots of different games. There's lots of different playable games. There might even be an infinite number of playable games. There's a lot of non-playable games. Those are the ones that aren't any fun. And there's a lot of interactions that aren't games. Okay, so we can all accept that. And then we've added to that the observation or the presupposition that the ability to play games is a prerequisite for being socialized, so being able to operate together with people, and that that operation has elements of competition and elements of cooperation. Reasonable? And then you might say, well, everything people do communally has a game-like aspect. And you might say, well, that's actually why kids like to play games. Because kids play games because games are a simplified analog of life. And if you get good at playing games, well, what happens is the games you play become increasingly complex and more real-world-like until they're actually indistinguishable from acting in the world.